In this video, we're going to take a look at recreating Simon Fiedler's GeoBoil rig that he set up in Houdini and then converts to a asset and uses a Houdini bridge and uses it inside of Cinema 4D. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the entire setup that he's done in Houdini and convert that into an X Particles rig. So this is what we've come up with. So let's jump in and get started. First thing I'm going to do is lay down an X particle system and a sphere. We'll go into and grab a sphere primitive and we'll change the type to icosahedron and give it about 70 segments, so it's quite dense. And we can have a look at the wires. We'll change our display quickly to quick shading with lines. And what we want to do is we want to emit some particles on this surface that don't move, but they just are emitted and scale up and then die. So let's get that working. Go into our emitters and create an emitter. Let's set up some of the options in the display. We'll go to display, change the display to circles filled, and we'll change the colour to white so we can see what they look like. I'm going to go into the emissions tab, change the birth rate down to 20, and this is something we will change later on. We're going to set it up as a reusable rig, so this stuff will be set up in Espresso so you can change the count easily. We're going to go down and change the speed to 0 because we don't want them to move, we just want them to be born on the surface. And the lifespan we're going to change to the same as what Simon used, which is 1.5 with a variation of 0.8. Once that's done, we'll go to the Objects tab and change the emitter shape to Object and drop our sphere into the object list. And we can change the emit from to polygon area rather than center of polys. And if we push play, you can see we're going to get these little dots that just pop up and pop off. Okay, so what we need now is a couple of things. We need to give them a random scale, and we also want them to scale up. So to get the random scale, we'll go to the emissions tab, and we're going to put a 1 in the variation. That means there's 100% variation between the sizes. If you push play, you might see that you get some bigger ones and some smaller ones. So now we need them to scale up. We're simply going to go into modifiers and choose the generate scale modifier, and I'm going to start labeling some stuff. So I'm going to call this one emitter main and scale main. Scale modifier, we're going to change it to change the particle radius rather than particle scale, and here we've got a radius change, which is how fast it's going to change, and a size it's going to change to. So if we push play now, you can see they just grow up. There's no random in there anymore, so we need to use the clamp within range, and that will give us our random scales again. Okay, so what we want to do is we want them to be bigger, and I'm going to change this to about 0.5. So you just get a bit more speed and a bit more time to grow. You can change this to about 30 as well, just get a little bit more of the size going on in there. Okay, so that's already starting to be the boil. What we need is some geometry. So we go and create a generator object, and we're going to give it another sphere. So we're going to use another icosahedron sphere and drop that into the generator. Set the generator to talk to our emitter main and change the scale to particle radius. That means it's going to take the scale defined in the emitter. So you can see we're getting the correct scales now. Push play. We've got our bubbles boiling on the surface of the object and then popping off. Now what we need to do is we need to convert all this to a mesh later on. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop them into connect object. So go to your menu and choose connect. I'm going to drop that in here. We're going to call this one main. And what we're going to put in there is the generator and the sphere. So now that's all connected up into one single mesh object, we can do different things with it as a single object. We don't need to weld any points. So that's looking pretty good. And before we start looking at the meshing, the one thing that Simon did in his tutorial was he created an inside sphere so that he could boolean inside of the VBD volumes, VDB. We don't really need to do that because the Skinner inside X particles will create an internal mesh anyway, but I'll show you how to do that quickly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set this one to be Xray mode so we can see what we're doing. I'll turn off lines for now. We can copy this emitter. You can see it's creating the particles there. Let's change the name to inner. And we'll change the display so we can see them a bit better. And what we need to do is copy the scale modifier, so control drag that and relabel that onto inner. And then make sure that these two scale modifiers don't talk to both emitters. So from the emitter main, go into your modifiers and exclude inner, and then from inner exclude main. So now what we can do is with our inner modifier, we can change some of the settings slightly so that the particles are slightly smaller than the volume that we've got already with the previous particles. So you can see it's slightly smaller. We could go smaller again, let's say something like 0.3. That's good. So you can see now we're getting this inside volume as well as the external. And when you use the Skinner, you can use that inside the surface cutting options, but we don't really need to, so that was just a way to show you how you could go about doing that process with X particles. So I'm going to get rid of these, and we're going to move on to skinning. So what we need to do is we need to get a generator and choose Skinner, and the source is going to be our main. And you can see it's going to create a mesh around that. So we can hide the main object now from the hierarchy. Let's get that out of the view. And with this mesh we want to have a little play with some of the settings. I'm going to go and change the polygon size to 5 and our render polygon size to 1. And the reason I'm not having it equal is because we still want some viewport speed. If I set them both to 1 it'll be too slow, but when it comes down to render, it's going to render them really tight. I'm going to change the smoothing. I'm going to add geometry smoothing and put about 12 iterations into that. Just tighten it up nicely. And I'm going to change the surface to Revel, just because I found that one works quite nicely with this, but you can play with those and see which one works best for your scene. And we're going to go and change the surface level way down to about 10%. So you can see it's quite tight. Now you can see what it's looking like in the viewport, but if we hit render, and this will take a little while because it's got to calculate a load of polygons, so we'll render this, and it should take about 20-23 seconds to render, or to do the preparing phase, just doing at the moment. There you go. So you can see you've got really nice tight little bubbles going on. 19 seconds is not too bad to prepare the Skinner with that many polygons, and it's looking good straight away. We've almost got the setup done as far as getting the bubbles on a surface, but what we want to do is actually convert this whole thing into an espresso rig where you can change out your geometry and have any object as your bubbling object. So let's work on that. What we need to do is we need to make a way so that the sphere object can be changed into anything else. So what we'll do is we'll drag this out, and we're going to select it, and we're going to go and choose an instance, and we're going to bring the instance down under here, and the instance is now referencing that sphere. So if we turn that off, you can see we're going to get a skinned mesh based on our reference. And that means we've now got a linked list, and that linked list can be set up in Xray. Okay, so that's a good start. So let's start looking at the Xray. I'm going to turn this into a group, Alt G, call it GeoBoil, and I'm going to drop in another null, so just drop a null in there and call this Xray. I like to keep my Xray in its own little null system. Add an Xray tag. We can close that for now. Go to GeoBoil and user data, manage user data. We're going to add a group, pull it out of the hierarchy, and call that GeoBoil Options. Okay, so the first option we want is a linked list. So we'll drop data in there, and we'll call this object, and we'll change the data type to link, and that's going to give us a link that we can drop anything into. So we'll put OK for that, and look at our GeoBoil options. So we've got our link, so let's set that up in Xray. Drag our GeoBoil null in, and select the GeoBoil null here, and drag and drop the object into the output, and then we're going to go to the instance object, drag a copy of that in, and with that selected, drag the reference object into the input. So now we can drop that straight into there, link it up, and by default it's got nothing, so that has vanished. So we go to the GeoBoil null and drag our sphere in. And there you go, it's reskinned it, and it's now referencing that via our expression. So that's cool. We can start playing around with some of these options. So let's have a look at how that works. That's selected. Let's say we want a torus to be our GeoBoil object. Like that. Hide that. Select the GeoBoil, drop this torus in here. Let it calculate, and you can see it's now talking to that, which is good. However, our system has now got nothing to reference for the emitter. So we need to actually get another copy of this. We're going to drag that out, and I'm going to put that inside a connect object as well. So we'll go to our menu, choose connect, drag that down, drop that in there, and let's call this object. Oops. We can hide that, but we need to emit from that object. Okay, so now we can start emitting our bubbles on top of the surface, and you can see now that the skinner is not seeing all of that mesh, and if you've got that problem you just need to put in more segments into the mesh object. And because we've got a low polygon size in the viewport, it's going to be pretty fast, but when it comes to rendering it'll work nicely. There you go, so you're getting the nice boils on top of our referenced, and there's still some dots. Just again put more segments into your base mesh. Okay, so I need to just quickly make sure that our referencing is working on both of our instances. So let's go back to the GeoBoil and drop the sphere in there. Go back to frame 0 and let's see if that's not talking to the right thing. So I'm going to drop this one in here and do the same thing. So that they both talk to the correct object. And our surface is working. Okay, good. Right, now we need some options to play with for settings. Things like how many bubbles we want, how much size we want. So let's get those working. Go to our emitter. We're going to go to the emissions and we want to get birth rate. So let's go to GeoBoil, manage user data. And I'm going to create a new group, drop that into the hierarchy, and we'll call this one bubbles. And in the bubbles we want to get some user data, so I'm going to say OK, go to the emitter and copy this user interface, back to GeoBoil and paste it in. So birth rate, OK, that's good, and we'll set the default to 20. OK, and then we want to look at things like the scale, so let's go to the scale modifier. We want this one and we want upper radius limit. We can keep everything else as it is, so use the database and copy those. I'll paste these into here as well, and we'll just drop those under birth rate. And again we want radius change, we'll keep that at 0.5, upper limit 30, just as defaults. Okay, so let's get these into our GeoBoil. Just drop birth rate, radius change, and upper limit. And then go to the correct objects and set up their nodes. So birth rate goes into here. Then we get the scale modifier, get that node, let's just tidy it up. Scale modifier is going to have radius change as an input and upper radius as an input. Let's connect those. Good. So now with the GeoBoil, we have control over how many particles are birthed, so we can get more of those. See, you'll start getting a lot more. You can define how fast they are and how big they grow. So you can really push exactly what you're getting out of your boiling system without having to dive inside this hierarchy. It's all set up as an espresso. So let's stop that and go back to the defaults. 30.5 and 30. Okay, and then we want to put a few options for the skinner just so we can tweak that while we're playing around as well. So with the skinner, let's go in and have a look. I want to be able to change the ISO surface level, which is going to change how thick it is. And what else would we want to change? Perhaps the render polygon and particle size. So let's select all those, hold Control, right click, copy user data. Let's go into our user data manager, create a new group, and we'll call this mesh, and paste all those. That. Okay, so we've got our surface, and our default's going to be the rivel. Surface level, our default is 10. Oops. polygon size default is 5, and render polygons default is 1. And so the higher detail you want, you can go lower at a cost of render time. That just gives us a little bit immediate access if we want to play with the tool or give it to someone else to use. So we'll say OK, and we'll set that up in Espresso. So we're going to drop our Skinner object in there and get the user data outputs done. So select GeoBoil. So we have surface, surface level, polygon size, polygon render size, and get Skinner. Just drop them into the input. And then connect those up. Okay, with that one done, we've pretty much set up. We now have a fully controllable rig where you can send it to clients, anyone with X-particles, and they can just swap their geometry out really easily. The last thing I tend to do with this sort of rig is I'd go in and put these things into their own layer. So new layer, go to the layers and just hide them from the actual hierarchy. So we got like that. So all you get is the GeoBoil null, and it's a nice idea to give this a color. So set it to automatic, and give it a color, and it's pretty much like a plugin. You've got this GeoBoil null, and that's got the options, and the user can swap out the options as they need, and they're ready to go. So let's take it to the next level, which is getting some materials on there. So we'll add a camera, and we'll add a light. Then I'm just going to drag the light behind the camera and just put it sort of off to the side, like so, and then drop the light into the camera. So wherever we are with the camera, our light's going to be just sitting there, it won't move. Okay, then we're going to go and add a background material. So new material, and we'll use a gradient, and we'll change that to a 2D circle. First knot's going to be a yellow, use for a yellowy browny colour. So, and then we'll get rid of that knot. So we've got the same colour, just make that more of a brown, darker version of the same. Then we'll drop that onto a background object and make sure you don't have reflection channel on there, don't want any specular. Then we're going to put an HDR on a sky object, so we'll just get a sky and compositing tag on that, and just make sure it doesn't cast shadows and it's not seen by camera, it's just seen by rays and transparency and things like that. Drop a HDR on there or some sort of environment material. Again, don't want any reflections. That on the sky, and then if we render, we're just going to get black because we've got the light, and also I'll just stop that. Go to our GeoBoil and just up your render polygons while you're testing. So let's go for 4, and now we can render it all render quickly because it's not going to calculate all those polygons. You can see it's just black because there's the light behind it, but there's also no material on here. So let's go new material, and this is the one for our mesh, so you can drop that onto the mesh object, and let's just make sure we are on the right object. So go in, yep, Skinner, and I'm just going to change the mapping to cubic. Okay, so just go back, we can hide those again. Okay, right, let's get this material. I'm going to go for a dark green for the base color, and obviously this can be any color you want. And we go to the reflectance channel, and we'll drop on some GGX as a reflective layer and a roughness of about 15 to 20%. Should be okay. I can leave everything else for now. We might need to tweak it later, but we'll leave it as it is. We'll just go down and change the specular and the reflection strength, so I don't want too much. Like so. Okay, then we're going to go to our transparency channel, and we're going to set the refraction to 1.6, quite high. We're going to put a tiny amount of colour into the actual colour. Okay, what is that? And then a tiny amount into the absorption as well. Not too much, otherwise it'll get dark. And the absorption distance to about 30%. You can put some blurriness in there, it will slow it down quite drastically, but it will help with the effect. But we've got blurry reflections on top, so you don't always need it. And the next thing we're going to do, which will sort of mask a lot of the transparency, is to put a Fresnel in there. So we'll go in and we'll put a Fresnel, and you can see it's just going to be transparent on the edges, not so much on the internal structure, which is what we want. We want our bubbles to have a bit of transparency, the internal structure to stay pretty much solid. Okay, we'll leave everything else as it is for now, and let's do a quick render. So you can see these bubbles are getting their transparency, and these giving these little highlights inside, so that's cool. That's not too bad. You can play around with that and to get it exactly how you want. It's a complex sort of material to try and achieve. And the last thing I want to do is just put a bit of bump on there. So we'll go into the bump channel and we'll drop in a noise. And the noise, we're going to use a stipple. Set that to about 20% as well. And just drop it down to 4 or 5%. It's not too strong. So then we can do a quick render, setting it back to the polygon size of 1. This will take a while because of the transparency. Okay, so that's it. You're pretty much set to go. We've got our GeoBoil rig all set up, easy interchangeable object link, quick settings to define what the bubble's doing, and nice material. So that's the final rig. Let's have a look at what we came up with again. I just want to thank Simon Fiedler for letting us take a go at recreating this in Cinema with X Particles.